Welcome to another episode of the podcast, and it's great to have you here. Our guests today are Adarian Barr and Jenn Pilotti. Adarian is a former college track and field coach who is now a movement consultant and educator. He's been a multi-time guest on this show, and he's absolutely one of my biggest influences in the way I observe and coach athletic movement and sports skills. Jenn Pilotti is a movement coach, an author, and an educator. She's been studying the principles of movement for over 2 decades. Jenn's own movement disciplines range from running to dance to aerial arts and more, and she regularly lectures and teaches workshops for movement educators and those curious about movement. Together, the two co-authored the book, Let Me Introduce You. On the podcast today, we'll be getting pretty heavily into training the feet and locomotion. And when it comes to training the feet, a lot of times we just think, well, just go barefoot a little bit more often. And that is a good thing to do. But there's a lot more nuance to training the feet in context of our human movement than just that. There's a lot more nuance to just producing force into the ground. Great athletes use their feet well. They manage collisions well, they manage pressure well, and we'll be talking about that and a whole lot more on the podcast today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I know you guys will as well. And talking with Adarian is always something that stretches my brain. Having Jenn on the show was an amazing addition. It's always interesting to get different people's perspectives on Adarian's work, and she's spent an awful lot of time, especially in the context of writing the book with him. So I know you guys will enjoy this conversation. It was super informative. Before we get started with the show, I wanted to share a little bit about our show's 3 sponsors. The first is Lost Empire Herbs. Performance herbalism has been an absolute game changer for me, and I know it can be for you too. When we think of supplements, we probably think of the typical supplement store, processed protein, processed pre-workouts. Not saying there's anything wrong with those things. I certainly love a good protein supplement, but for me, the closer that I can get to nature, the less ingredients that are on the can, the less steps between the ground and to my doorstep, the better. And that's one of the reasons I love Lost Empire Herbs so much. I've had tremendous success, results, even the way my body has felt after using their products, things such as the Phoenix Formula, Shilajit, and others. And my clients have seen that as well. It's something I recommend not just to you guys, but also to people that I work with. And so if you want to get 15% off your order, you can head to lostempireherbs.com/justfly. If you want to try Pine Pollen, one of their flagship products, for free with just a modest cost of shipping, head to justflypinepollen.com. Our next sponsor is Exogen Wearable Resistance by Lila. Exogen is true artistry when it comes to resistance training. Exogen features microweights that you can selectively strap onto your body via things like shin or calf sleeves. And you can create the exact training effect, exact resistance effect that you want that fits exactly with the sports skills you're training. It feels like a second skin, and the creativity you can achieve with it is just tremendous. Some of the spirals, the asymmetry, Chris Corfist, a previous guest, talked about using it with asymmetry, for example. There's so much you can do with it. And I truly look forward to every training session that I go out and do with the Lila gear, because I know that not only am I going to get a great workout, I'm going to be able to use the potentiation from the gear, but I also am going to learn something about how my body operates, because you can spin, spiral, and align these weights in so many unique ways. So if you want to learn more about the Exogen gear, and you can also get 15% off your order, head to lilateam.com. That's LILA team.com. And then you can use the code JFS2023 to grab that 15% off your order. Our last sponsor is actually an announcement, and that's just to remind you all, or inform you if you haven't heard, that the Elastic Essentials Level 2 in-person seminar is being held July 14th and 15th here in Cincinnati, Ohio. You can grab the early bird for 7 more weeks after the date of this podcast release into the end of May. And it's a great hands-on learning opportunity. I've gotten so much great feedback from people who have attended the summer and winter seminars that I did last year. And I'd really be excited to see you there in Cincinnati. Spots are filling up, so make sure you grab your spot today. And again, you can take advantage of that early bird price. All that being said, let's get onto the podcast here with Adarian Barr and Jenn Pilotti. Jenn, Adarian, awesome to have you on the show. Can we get started by just the story of how you two met and the process of how you started working together?
Sure. So my friend Chris Ruffalo runs this kind of collaborative thing called Think Movement. And in June of 2020, she wanted to have a get together. at my place, my studio, which I still had. And I said, sure. And she said, I'm going to bring a couple of other people. Is that okay? I was like, yeah, it's totally fine. And I was presenting first thing in the morning. And then this other guy, Adarian, who I did not know, was presenting after me. This is one of the people she invited. So I do my thing. I talk about the foot, nonetheless. And then and then Adarian gets up and was kind enough not to like totally destroy what I had just said. But he finished and I'm like, okay, this dude knows more than I do, which is really irritating. And I want to know like what it is that he knows. And that was sort of how it all started.
Yeah, that was out of college. Chris had emailed me and said, hey, you don't know me. And I just found I didn't know Chris. But she was like, you don't know me, but I got this thing that's going to be down in Monterey. And she's like, would you mind coming and presenting? And I just got the motorcycle. I'm thinking like, yeah, I just got the motorcycle, right down to Monterey, cool, And she's like, it's free when I pay anything. I'm like, okay, she says, will you come? I said, yeah, I'll come. And she's like, what do you want to talk about? And I didn't know anybody else there. I didn't even know Chris. I just knew I was going to this thing. So then after that, it was we kept on talking and stuff and everything, and then we did like a presentation together. And she kept telling me like, we need to write a book. And I'm like, I don't do books. I don't do books. And then finally I was like, okay, let's do a book. But it came about too because like for like when we started doing webinars together over the pandemic and everything, it was like she would ask the right questions. So that's kind of started. And so then we just did the book.
Yeah, it was good in reading through it too, and I'm sure we'll chat about it again briefly towards the end of the show. But in my time with you, Adarian, you had mentioned a lot of the things that are in the book, and it was like if you mentioned like complementary pairs or things work in pairs, and I would be like, well, what does that mean? And then I would kind of learn by doing over the years. But it's really nice to see it in print. Like I'm a person who likes. I by far do the best reading and reflecting initially. Like I'm a reader and a reflector, and it is. I am a kinesthetic learner too, but I really, it's kind of cool to see how it's just all this stuff that you talked about. It's like it's there. It's like okay, like it's in print. There's pictures. It's great. So, kudos to you for finally putting that together. And maybe we could talk a little bit more about that process towards the end of things. But maybe we can kind of kick this off because I wanted to go through some of the core concepts of the book. And like I mentioned, like complementary pairs, like all these things that are fundamental just to move, whether it's sprinting, jumping, running, whatever you're doing, it's fundamental to all of it. And so, but maybe let's kick this off by Jenn. Tell me a little bit about that foot conversation. So what were you presenting? Like, if you remember back, what were you presenting? And tell me about the process. Tell me about the process of digging in there that you're like, oh, okay. And you talked to Adarian and tell me about how that conversation went and a little bit about how that led you to where you are now.
So I presented on the connection between the foot to the pelvis, which is something I have been studying ad nauseum for like probably a decade. And I did a very experiential, like kind of somatic based body mapping type movement session. And then Adarian gets up after me and he focuses only on the lateral longitudinal arch. And I'm like, why is this blowing my mind right now? And why is this making everything feel so different? So the next morning I went for a run because I run and I used it. And I was like, okay, there's something here. And why hasn't anybody taught me this before? Which just led to questions. And I have so many questions. And Adarian has been very patient with me because, as he said, I ask a lot of them because I want to know how to get from A to B to C to D to E.
Yeah. So with that, tell me a little bit about that, though. I mean, because that was, I think, the process for me so often, even something like squatted running for me. Like, and I was always, we've had these conversations on this show before, but like, I was always of the common, like in sprinting, the common sprint crowd, run tall. And I tried every cue in the book and do my flying 10 meters. And no cue ever helped me to run any faster. In fact, usually they made me slower. And I would just be like, what's wrong with me? Like, and then I would do some lower hip height running with just a little bit lowered center of mass. That's like, wow, I really feel my glutes now. This is amazing. And then I saw Adarian posting a squatting running video, and that like just I was like, okay, there is something that is very powerful here, and I had to experience it and feel it. And then you feel it and you know there's something there, and now you want to learn more about it. And so with your with the lateral arch, tell me about that and how, like, what did you notice? What did you connect in the running? And then where did that go from there? And the foot to hip thing is still, I'm still intrigued by that too. I'm actually curious as to your original take there. But tell me a little bit more about that lateral arch and what you were noticing that took you forward with that.
So, and Adarian very simply said, reach the pinky toe long and away from the foot, right? To get the lateral longitudinal arch to form. So when I went on my run the next morning, that's what I did. I focused on keeping the pinky toe long and reaching it a little bit away from the foot. And it created a very different impact with the ground. And I was wearing my running watch, so I could see that my mile splits had been all over for a long time, and they had not been consistent. But I had like a 3-mile chunk where my mile splits were within like 8 seconds of each other. I'm like, this is interesting. And I'm not working any harder. And I'd been trying all kinds of things with running. And I've been running since I was 16. So I've spent a lot of time playing with running. So that was how that all kind of like started. And then as I dug into it, and what Adarian and I collaborated on next actually didn't have to do with the foot, but it did have to do with the pelvis. He talked a little bit about, and I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but it was almost like closing the pelvis and opening the pelvis, kind of this compression and expansion of that area. And when we did that in the workshop that we collaborated on, and then when I took that again into running, I was like, this is interesting. If I fold the hip one way as I use my foot using the lateral longitudinal arch, I feel this very fluid, more rhythmic movement than I had been getting. So that was kind of how it all began.
Yeah. It does strike me too that, Darren, did you have anything to add on to that?
No, I was just going to say, just kind of like the time we was at the track and cow, and I remember you was working on squatted, and I said, you wanted to finish up with like a quarter mile. I said, go just try squatted. And then from Joe's face, he was totally like, it's hard. It's not normal anymore, but it was just look on his face, it's like, this is not.
I might go run a squatted 400 again, honestly, just for fun. It was funny too, because I feel like I remember Kevin and I forget, Chantel was running that with me, and you kept saying, get lower. Like, it's like, I don't know how squatted, like it was kind of like really squatted for 50 and then about maybe 200 of not as much, but trying. And then it's like, we're getting back close to Adarian. So we'll I was dead, man. But it was good because I like a week later or not too much longer later, I ran the fastest 10 fly split that I had in, honestly, ever since I've been measuring. I was maybe a little faster, 10 years ago on a good day when I wasn't thinking about how to sprint, type thing. But it was awesome. And so anyways, I was going to say too, Jenn, with a lot of the things in your perception of it, I think about how people learn too. And I mentioned for me, like I do like to see things in a book and I like to have the intellectual frame, but a lot of learning from Adarian was based on the kinesthetic side. And I think sometimes too, how we just like to learn or acquire knowledge in general. Like a lot of times it's, well, is it in a research paper? Is it peer reviewed? Is it societally accepted? So, but then you're in your own body doing something and your body is telling you something different. And then it's like, okay, well, I need to find why this is, I need to ask questions. And I know we both had that experience. And so I was going to say, like, it does see watching your, like a lot of your videos, it is like, you seem like someone who's very attuned to some of the slower, like being able to really slow things down. I've had like Feldenkrais type folk on the show, and it is, I don't think that's everybody's learning style. I know I will do it. I struggle with that. But maybe just tell me a little bit too. And I would like to keep kind of going on that the foot topic as well. But I do think that sometimes there can be a disconnect. I know, Darren, you've done a ton of stuff with like the palo stick. I'll watch you doing things on one leg. And I can tell there's a lot of feeling and sensing going on there. Like you are feeling things happening in your body. Someone might just watch that on Instagram and be like, well, what's going on? And we are so used to just like very big And I think there's a spectrum. There are the big, like explosive, high force, high output, I don't want to say flashy, but just the things that you could say they're the very like masculine, out, expansive side that's very easy to recognize. And then on the other side, you have all the more inner, I guess you call it the feminine or just the soft side where it's more exploratory. And I think people will cater towards one side or the other, but I think the problem is just people only stick on one side. They only are attracted to one, and they don't really spend some time, like even if you don't like it, like just to do a little bit of it, just to feel how your body wants to move just a little, because that is something that does transcend I need just the pure intellectual side of the things. And I think we need to embrace them all. But anyways, I'm just curious, long-winded. I was just going to ask Jenn, maybe you're expanding on that because there's someone else who's learned from Adarian and someone who I could tell in watching your videos, you are very good at the soft side. Yeah, just your take on how you've learned from that process, and then any thoughts on how that would relate to other people's learning process.
Well, as you said, I think it's really important to be able to sense, and it's also really important to be able to just do. And this is where a lot of people get stuck. They either just do and they don't sense, or they just sense and they don't do.
Yes,
we need
yes.
both, right? And a lot of my videos, yes, are definitely on the softer side, but I've always lifted weights. And like right now I'm learning aerial arts. So there's a lot of just hurling your body around in the air and hoping everything goes okay. But you need some sort of body awareness for that. And the body awareness that you gain from the softer side actually makes that like just doing so much better. And it's interesting what you were saying about Feldenkrais, because I spent a year trying to like really get into Feldenkrais. I'm like, all right, I'm going to do Feldenkrais every Sunday. I would make it through like 15 minutes of a lesson. And I'm like, I am bored out of my mind. I need to go like run. But during that time, this was after I had studied PRI for like 4 years. I actually gained way more body awareness in those 15-minute chunks of Feldenkrais that I did for a year than I did doing the PRI. And I learned way more about like my movement patterns than I did when I was studying PRI. And I went pretty far down the PRI rabbit hole. So I found all of that really interesting too. I find it really interesting to be able to put everything together. I think you can sense when you're doing just about anything. Mm-hmm. If you have a really good, like finely tuned body schema and body map.
Yeah. I mean, Adarian, I'm assuming that's always just come as natural as can be for you. I mean, like I've seen, obviously you doing like things with the paddle stick, one leg, very mindful looking things. It maybe take me back. Just, I think this would be interesting. Like, obviously you were playing football for a little bit, I think in high school, and then you just specialized in track. But at what point did some of these ideas of where you really started to come into like that sensory element, like feeling what your body was doing? I'd be curious to go back in a little bit of history for where you were started on that path.
Well, I think for me, it started probably about 10, 12 years ago. I was, when I remember, when I was working at this school, and it was a school to train trainers. They got degrees in how to be a trainer and all that kind of stuff. ACSM. And I remember being there, and we would lift weights, because I was kind of the gym supervisor, and so we would go and we work out with weights and stuff like that. And I'm the guy with the least amount of credentials of the people there. And so people would they would challenge me. Okay, let's go. Okay, let's go. And I would tell them like I remember we one time we was deadlifting, and I think I got to 505. People looking at me like, what? I said, it's not that I'm strong, I just know what I'm doing. I just know what I'm doing, because I can feel it, And so, or we'd be pull-ups or whatever the case may be, so about that time, I started really, once I said that, I started really thinking about like the feeling of the doing part versus just like I said, just trying to muscle it, because we would have a gym and I still played basketball. I think at the time I was still dunking and everything. And so they just thought like, oh, you're just an athlete. No, I know what I'm doing over here too. And then I think that's when I came out with Palo and some other stuff. Because I think that's when Viper came out, the thing everybody was, thinking like, I can do better. And that's probably what's challenged. I can do better than that. It's like, I can do better than that. And it was something else. I can do better than that too. So that started that whole process, and I remember when I came out with Palo, it was very much about connection, because it came out, I remember when I first came out with Palo, I was working, somebody was a hockey player. They wanted to run fast. I'm like, well, hockey players, this is what they do, And so they use a stick. And so I remember I went and got a stick, and I was thinking like, oh, there's something to this. I think that day I had track practice with a youth track club. And so we got hurdlers, and we put sticks in everybody's hands and hurdling with the stick and everything. I'm like, oh, it's something to this. So we're back to that connection thing. And then I went and chopped up a broomstick, chopped up this, chopped up that. And then, once again, you start going back to your experience and everything. I think those people miss out on most is the recall and experience you done had. And that's what I try to get people to do. Or even in seeing things, you've seen that before, And so I remember, back to college days of drinking and how, I hated drinking out of plastic cups because my hand would get tired as you squeeze tighter and tighter and tighter. But anytime I was drinking out of a glass, I never got tired. And so it's like, well, how come I can hold this glass forever and don't get tired with this plastic cup? Same weight, same whatever, And it was something about glass. So that's when we tried to make paddle out of glass-like material, which is not glass-like. But it had to be once two hands touched it, I didn't want to grip it really tight. I just wanted to hold it. And so that really started taking me down this whole, feeling, sensing, imagining, and everything. But that was kind of the process, just going back when I went to that school and everything. I'm like, okay. But watch this.
Yeah. It's cool to hear all the way back. And just thinking about the way your mind works, like in the Myers-Briggs in psychology, you have like the 4 different like categorizations. And one of them is, do you approach the world on the level of more thinking or more feeling? And I am like thinking, like almost crank the needle all the way, almost,
Right.
And that's why it was so good to meet you. Cause it's like, I would have never thought about does my hand get more tired with the plastic or a glass cup? I would have not even, that would have just been so far off of my radar. But it's glad that you mentioned that, because that is like, for people, I think that in the world of sprinting and running, that is a really competitive world. I think that it's so easy to just to point to intellectual, I guess just purely intellect. We wage our competition who can make the best program or the best system on only intellectual things, because that's also the easiest things that float around in the social media space or whatever. It's all ideas. But at the end of the day, like, to never have sensed something. And it's interesting too, because the more time I've spent with you, like I'm realizing like this all came from, I felt this felt good, this didn't feel good. Now what do I do with it? Like, how does this apply to the system? And this constant tinkering, not from the very typical, and I do think it's good to have things, obviously you guys wrote a book, there is something that is on paper, solid structure, I can reference this in the typical intellectual way, and that's really important, and it's really important for me. But at the same time, to also go and piece by piece from a sensory perspective, build on the other end of things. And so it makes sense to me too, because I'm just spending so much time with you. But I think from a greater philosophical perspective, it's just not where we tend to go. And it's almost as if we need a roadmap on like, all right, if we're going to approach performance, running, throwing, cutting from a sensory perspective, well, we know where to start from an intellectual perspective. It's all around us. But if you want to sense, start here. And that's right. It's like, you got to go. But at the same time, it's never been easier to be inundated with information than it is today. But in the same perspective of needing a mentor, and like even like learning a martial art, like, are you going to learn a martial art? Are you going to learn how to swim by just reading about it? No, you have to find somebody who can help you to feel these things. You have to actually feel it. You have to feel the water. And so I don't want to get too carried away down that rabbit hole, but it's just cool to see how you were always kind of attuned to that. And then it's just manifested itself when you actually started to apply it to performance, where I think so often it is just the other way around a little bit,
Well, even, being in track for so long, I remember track was one of those things where people say, you have to feel it. I'm thinking, but I don't feel that. I remember in triple jumping, I don't feel that. I knew when I jumped well, but I don't know why I jumped well. I just know, okay, that was a good jump and everything. I remember the first time, I left Colorado. When I left Colorado, I was struggling because I'm thinking like, I'm only jumping, 50, 51 feet. I want to be jumping 53, 54 feet. And so some other things were going on. Left Colorado. I think I spent a year training myself. I was jumping rope, running hills, doing this other thing. First track meet I went to, boom, 53 feet. And then at that point in time, but what happened is like all of a sudden, like, I can feel this. And so it became part of that really early days of, what just happened and everything. Because like I said before, you got to feel this. I'm like, I don't know what y'all talking about. I really don't. And you go home frustrated, like, I don't know what they're talking about, and I had some good coaches and stuff like that, but that was the biggest thing, you gotta feel this, feel like you could feel like this here, feel like, I don't know what you're talking about, But even like I said, and one of the things like And what I try to get people to do is a lot of times, like I say now, is like it's based on experience. And so a lot of what we've done, can recall a prior experience that you can relate to. And if we can do that, then now I get it. Without being able to recall that prior experience, then it's just like, I have no idea.
Yeah, and then you just rely on, I think what then happens is we tend to rely on what I call the more intellectual side of the needle is just positions. Oh, get in this position. Like, that's easy. I can attach my intellect to that. But so often, like runners everywhere, track folk everywhere, like just like me, I would have no idea what cup was better. Like, I would have absolutely no idea. But in the same way, I have absolutely no idea what sprint drill was correlating. I'm just like, do it. I feel. And honestly, if you were to say, like, let's just say sprint drills, marching drills, we talk about that a lot. The thing I would feel from that is actually bounce. And yeah, from a perspective of developing a quality bounce, yeah. But then I would try to take that and apply it to the actual horizontal sprinting. It didn't work. But I had no clue until I actually felt and made connections with, well, what does it feel like to squat down just a little bit? Oh, okay. And it's like, because now my coaching is like, and I still have a lot of, I guess you could say, more intellectual constructs, the way I structure my workouts and things like that. But I try to be very intentional now with every time I have like a constraint of running, there's a feeling pinned to it. Like, okay, here's the dynamics, here's the setup, but you should also feel this. And that's been one of my biggest growths, is because there was no way I would have had that on my radar 10 years ago. I mean, kind of. I will cheat myself completely. I did have that in I would coach javelin. For some reason, javelin was easier to pin that to than like sprinting. And maybe it's just because, I don't know, it's like you would feel the stretch and you would throw it. And if it doesn't go far, it's like, well, I know how I screwed that one up, but like.
Right. So, let me forget about that one. Yeah. But even like now, I have I have this little workout group. And one of the things I did recently was, and I told them, you want to feel the impact. As you run, take time, feel the impact, so you can learn what to do with the impact. If you never feel it, and a lot of times when we taught to sprint, something like that, they say, run like you're running on hot coals. Well, that's avoiding the impact. Yeah. You're avoiding the impact now, but you need to feel this impact so you can understand what to do with it. If you can't feel it, how can you ever even think about doing something with it? And that's even like why I won't throw javelin, because in my mind, impact is not going to be good. Even though you see people, come thinking like, I don't want to see my legs straighten out like that. Even, in my mind, I don't want to feel that. So I'm not going to mess with it. But then I'll triple jump. So.
Yeah. Your torso obviously had to rotate a little bit to triple jump. I mean, it's like, I'm the prototypical I am so rotational and whippy. Like, that's just my thing. But I remember you're someone who's a little bit more, you tend to direct things, I feel like, a little bit more forward in that respect. So. All right, I was going to ask you, okay, so great point though, Adarian, with the inputs, because that was actually the first question I had as per the book, because I just think that, like, if I was to look through the whole book and be like, man, where's the one, if someone was just going to, I think you hate to be reductionist, but if I was just going to take one thing, it is that, like, because so much of coaching is just outputs. It's like, stomp the ground, be proactive into, which I think, like, you talk about like emotional reactivity. That's not a good thing if you don't have control of, but I think it's different when it comes to movement, because like the body already knows what to do here, and you actually want the body to be able to do its thing. And so can you guys tell me a little bit about, and if you want to relate back to a little bit about where you went with the foot, Jenn, that's awesome. But, the inputs and outputs, because I just think that if anyone just understands that and incorporating some sensing into it, like that is such a game changer. And so, yeah, maybe describe as per the book or however you guys want, inputs and outputs as you see them.
Well, I think inputs and outputs is everything. And actually, this was something I was way into before I met Adarian. So I was stoked that chapter 1 of the book was based on this, because I was like, okay, at least this is something I can write about without asking him a gazillion questions. But understanding pressure and thinking about how pressure relates to input was a light bulb moment for me when I was working on the book. Because even though, again, I've thought a lot about inputs and outputs over the years, if you can figure out how you're using pressure, again, for something simple like going for a run, if you understand how to use pressure and you understand how to direct pressure into the foot that's on the ground, everything changes. And even with clients, like I have one client who's not a runner, but I'm using a ton of running-based drills with her because she has, if we're going to talk about feet, she has high arches, limited range of motion in the ankle. And helping her understand how to direct pressure through her torso and into her foot has changed everything for her. She was just telling me, she's like, I feel better than I ever have. So there's so much to that I think it's, as you said, it's a big takeaway. It was a big takeaway for me for the book.
I think that's one of the overriding themes in the book, input the output. I mean, we say it over and over, input the output. So even with feet, it's one of those things. I remember, one of my first controversies on Instagram, social media was when I said, hey, and, people came after me pretty strongly because I said, it's not the force you got to deal with, it's the pressure, and I said, what happens with the foot, you reduce the surface area. So it's not force you're increasing, it's pressure you're increasing that you're responding to. And people were like, I said, so why are we wearing spikes then? You're wearing spikes because what's happening? You just reduce what? The surface area. That thing bites down. You don't have to push any harder. You just have to reduce the surface area. But that's an input. That pressure is an input, and you respond accordingly. And so, if you run flat-footed, it's the same amount of force, but the pressure's different. So you react different based on that input now. And the thing with pressure is, like even things you talk about in the book, you remember pressure. If you remember, like the other you said last week, I fell in my house, stumble reflex and everything. Nighttime chasing the dogs, and I know there's one part of the house where there's this ledge, and I got to miss the ledge. So what I do, I put myself into a stumble so I can miss the ledge, thinking I don't want to stub my toe, and I'm in the air and I'm falling, thinking like, ooh, go to the knees, And so I hit my knees, I'm thinking like, oh, but what happens on your knees? Technically, knees is a large surface area, but no big deal until my big toe slammed into the ground.
A lot of pressure.
Small surface area.
Yeah.
A lot of pressure. Now I have a big old blood blister, And what hurt the most? You think the knees would hurt the most. What hurt the most? The big toe slamming down. And so, like I said, that input mattered. It really mattered in the process and everything. And so I think that's what people really don't understand is that what's really running us, the brain understands pressure. As soon as you grab the bar to deadlift, what do you understand? The pressure. Based on that pressure, you know if it's heavy or not heavy. You don't have to see what the weight is, but as soon as you grab that bar, based on pressure, you already know if that thing's heavy or not heavy and how to act accordingly. But people really don't look at that way because they can so force. But you know how much force you're putting out, but you can kind of regulate pressure.
I think that's one of those defining things too, that I always like talking about how things differ in the gym, the weight room, than dynamic just running. I mean, running is the easiest, where you're moving forward. There's more weight shifting going on. There's more pressure. And I have a couple things that come to mind. One is, this is a little bit of something that I don't have like the numbers behind, but as just intuitively speaking, I feel like really fast people tend to have a lot more pressure related issues where they're riding that line of being hurt or not, in the sense of like little foot things, sesamoid, like, because they are capable of putting down a lot of force, yes, but a lot of pressure into a smaller area at one point in time. And so they're going to be riding that line more than someone who's like just kind of like, well, then again, people who are really bad at any pressure tend to get shin splits higher up. It's more of a general thing that's higher in the leg because they couldn't apply any pressure. And so now it's just going to show up higher in the system. Maybe that's like a thing where it's really fast and you have to deal with stuff that's more localized because you could put that down. Again, if someone wants to, run the numbers or their own version of that, but that's at least what I've perceived to be. And I was going to say too, it makes me think about when I've worn the random shoes that you would put together at the track. Way back when we were at the track, Adarian, it's like, hey, I made this shoe, try it. And sometimes it would be like a size too small, but I was like, screw it, I'll wear it anyways and run around. And, I just remember feeling very fast. But if I go further into that feeling of being fast, there's like, well, what is it about this that's making me fast? And it's like there's particular points of pressure coming up through my feet that really weren't there before. And it's like, and it's a faster reaction off the ground. So not only is it more pressure on particular points, but I also feel like whatever the response is off the ground is coming off the ground quicker. And now the rest of my body has to deal with that. And it could. And that was great. That was really cool. And so, with that input and the output too, with pressure, and that sounds like too, like what you were talking about, Jenn, with lateral arch, or thinking about considering the lateral aspect when you were running, you were changing the way the pressure was being input. Although there was a little proactivity, right? Because you did have to do something. You had to, and ideally you don't have to, like if you're running like, a competition, you don't want to have to think about that. Eventually it should be on automatic, right? But maybe go, Jenn, in context of that input and the foot, maybe go into that, the lateral aspect, and then maybe you can branch off of that too. Like, what are you, as a result of that, what are you doing that's impacting your running? And then Adarian, if you want to chime in as well.
Well, every time I see Adarian in person, I learn something new about what I need to be doing for running. Not what I need to be doing, but what could make my running more efficient. And the lateral aspect, as you said, it gave me that rolling action in the foot. I think I was dramatically missing that. So rolling from the pinky toe to the big toe ball of the foot, I wasn't getting that in the foot, that kind of rolling paddling action. And the last time I saw Adarian, he had me get my heel underneath me. So I had the forefoot going one way, and then he counter rotated the heel to get underneath my body. And the next morning, all I thought about was getting my heel underneath me. I don't even know like how I was doing it. I'm like, rotate the heel, rotate the heel. And my pace was faster than it's been since summer. I've been running in snow, so everything's been a lot slower. I was like, oh, I haven't seen these times in 6 months. This is fantastic. Mm-hmm. But it was the whole pressure change. And as you said, you don't necessarily know why you're going faster. Or, you feel you're faster. You're like, something significant has changed. And I understood that it was how I was pressurizing my system. And it started with my foot. And I couldn't tell you exactly what it looked like or, anything other than that it felt different. But that's a lot of what pressure does in my experience, especially in working with clients. I work with people one-on-one, and you ask them, what do you feel? And sometimes they'll look at you and they'll say, I don't know. It feels different, but I don't know why. And there's a lot of that, I think, that goes on within pressure. Things shift. You don't necessarily know why. Something might feel easier, it might feel harder, but the pressure is what does it.
But even if you ever look at when somebody lands and they blow their knee out, you can see the pressure ride through the system. You can see like, ooh, you can see it just go. Or when Achilles rupture, you can see like, oh yeah, that's you can see. So I think a lot of times too, when we dealing with these things, that becomes the overriding question is all of a sudden what we talk about when you talk about managing collision. Well, I'm trying to manage the pressure now. And if we talk about, unwanted vibrations, same thing, pressure. And we can show you on running stuff, like I said, triple jump, if you do it wrong, it hurts. Mm-hmm. It hurts. If you do it right, smooth as butter. Do it wrong, you could just, because all of a sudden what you're doing, you're getting this collision, you're getting this pressure in your back, or you're getting this pressure in the knee. I just recently showed Jenn a video of a kid that was running, and I said, based on how he's coming down on his knee. And you have to look up when you see the video, you go, yep, because the shin angle was already changed. The hip's still dropping, but where's it dropping now? Straight onto his knee. And the person said, yeah, they have sore knees. Well, this is probably why they have sore knees, because they're literally coming, the pressure's really going through their knee, and so that becomes a lot of it too, is that how do we, like I said, because we got this fluid thing running through us. We fluid, and we got these compartments. And so how do we manage all this stuff, the vibrations and the wiggles and everything like that as we go through it? And even, like I said, with the book where we talk about, like I said, like stubbing my toe, pain's there now. So guess what? That's not the pressure I'm looking for. So that's not pleasurable. So guess what? I avoid that area. And I think for like the first 4 days after I did it, I couldn't get to the big toe. It was like, no way am I even going over there. Even putting on pants was funny because it was vibrating. It was I could really feel the ridges in the end of your big toe. So as I put on pants, it was just nerving me. It's like, what was all it based on? It's just a lot of pressure down there.
I did actually, there was a video that was out. Maybe I'll put in the show notes if you want to expand on it. Before I mention the video, as you were talking, I did think of another, I think the more things that people can just feel in their own body, I like the stub your toe thing, right? Like anyone who stubbed their toe, you could think, oh, wow, lots of pressure in a small place. But I think about the opposite of that. Well, what would the opposite of that be? And I think about, I've spent time with Rafe Kelly and at his Return to the Source, and I'll watch the videos, and they'll do there was one, they were posting videos where they were jumping off a set of 3 stairs or something, and then they would do a dive roll and literally roll out of it. And they could roll out of it because they're distributing basically they're going head first, tucking their head down, and then or just a basic dive roll. If you're just doing a forward somersault roll, how do you not hurt yourself? Well, if you did it right on your head, that's a ton of pressure. You mitigate the pressure by tucking your head, shoulder under, and you spread it through your whole spine and rib cage. And that's how you don't get hurt. And you also, in the process, you're slowing things down a lot, and intentionally, obviously, to mitigate that. The opposite would be, I think if you just, if you hit your head and it was like that wouldn't be solid though, because your head would just go to the side. But if you hit a hard point, you would keep rolling faster. So, what I was trying to say though with all that was there was a video that was really cool. It was a guy, I think South African guy, running a 10-4 in the 100 barefoot. You had posted on that, right? And that was one of the first things, that I remember with you is like if I'm going to run barefoot, like it changes the pressure, it changes friction. If it's on like the track, there's like big changes that have to happen because of friction. If I have spikes on, I can at least push down a lot quicker because I don't have to worry about ripping the skin off my foot. But tell me a little bit about like for example, that barefoot runner, and I'll post it because the thing I noticed, it was a rear view video. This guy runs 10-4 in the 100 and he is rotating like crazy. And maybe this could fit into rotation and pressure. I know you guys wrote about that in the book, which is a really cool concept. Maybe this will feed right into that. But this guy, I mean, his knees, body was really, and there is rotation within a start, of course, but this guy was really working it. I mean, it was so cool to watch. And I know at least part of the more than typical was very likely to do with how he had to manage the pressure because of being barefoot. So I'm curious with what your take is on that, like accelerating from a barefoot on a track in light of pressure management and inputs.
Well, just the whole this the craziest thing that people miss out on is, once again, I remember one time running a race barefoot on a track, and I'm thinking like, this is not good because I couldn't create enough pressure to break the traction. I couldn't create enough pressure to break the traction. And that's one reason why we wear spikes, because we need to break the traction. Same thing. People getting starting blocks. Why can't they move their fingers? Because they can't create enough pressure to break the tracks between their hands and this rubber and things like that. So the fact that the guy was able to create enough pressure to break the traction, that to me was the amazing part, because it's like other than that, your feet stick. And your feet stick to the rubber. And so you have to you got to create enough to break it, And that same thing with a car, whatever the case may be, you got to create enough to break so things move. So that was a cool part there. And like even having triple jump barefoot is easy because at that point in time, I want to stick. So from triple jumping barefoot, I want to stick. If I'm trying to sprint, I don't want to stick. And so those are two very different spectrums of here, I want to create enough pressure to break traction. Here, I don't want to break. If I break it here, I'm falling out from underneath me. So, and you think about that in ice skating, what are they trying to do? They're trying to create enough pressure to do what? Turn into water. I got to create enough pressure to turn this into something else. And so we have the small area. So I think we forget about that a lot of times too, or even just in general, just in movement, like tell people, hit your funny bone, see what happens. That little area will give you the greatest, like, ooh, and everything. So that's what I saw. But I thought it was kind of cool, because I ran on asphalt. One thing about running on asphalt, why does your feet burn? Because they're slipping. There's really not a whole lot of pressure. They're slipping. So you can't even create enough. There's too much pressure in a sense to run on asphalt. Your feet slip and they burn. And people go, that's a good thing. No, that's not a good thing. It's not. But at the same time, you look at too, and we talk about proprioception of feet and everything. We just talk about that too. And you think about that for a second. And I always say, well, my feet are not for proprioception. And I said, because my eyes already told me what I'm about to do. If I'm running on asphalt, my eyes already told me. If it's smooth asphalt, I run a certain way. And the pressure confirms like, yeah, this is smooth asphalt. Or the pressure confirms like, this is jaggedy asphalt. And what I do, I start modulating how I'm running on this thing that the eyes already told me you might want to ease up on this a little bit. And so what do you do on that jaggedy stuff? What do? You put more down your foot to reduce the pressure. It's amazing how this works out and stuff. So once again, the eyes are telling me something. The feet going to confirm it with pressure that this is this or this isn't this.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned was the triple jumping, and you can and I found this too. I didn't do this till I had met you, but I found out, I actually can triple jump barefoot much better than I thought, which is crazy because it's like, 10x the forces of the body weight and the most in track and field. And it is, but it also, you do have a little bit longer to deal with those collisions. And I was thinking of something, Jenn, that you had said before we even started with distance running. And I think this is just cool because I think everybody who's listening to this is understands or is into or interested running or sprinting on some level. And obviously human locomotion is central to pretty much everything we do. But you had mentioned that the collision is different in distance running because you have to deal with it a little bit longer than sprinting. And I think about that with triple jump too. And so it's interesting to sometimes think about interrelationships of like track and field events, maybe not on fiber type, but on collisions. And maybe there's something with the collision length, but I was curious, maybe you guys could talk about the collision and the inputs as it relates to distance running as well compared to sprinting, because I think the more ways we can explore this examples, I think that'll be helpful for people.
Well, and Adarian can elaborate. Yeah, you should go for it. But
even I mean, let's think about like you said. Let's go with high jump. High jump is a very short collision. stick it and go. Long jump, very short collision, stick it and go. Triple jump, we're going to extend a little bit more. Same thing in running. That's one of the arguments, biggest arguments on social media is why is a sprinter landing in this squatted or this bent knee position? And so because they're not going to yield, they're not going to give anymore. They're done. But as a distance runner, what am I doing? I got movement at the ankle, which is an extended collision. And as the ankle or the tibia pitches forward, what is my thigh doing? My thigh's pitching backward. So I have these two things that are moving that's actually extending the collision. And at the same time, and people forget about the weight shift. Where's your weight now? The weight is being pushed further behind the body to even extend this collision even further versus on a sprinter, it's going to be closer to the body. So we get into these things here of just that there about how the body is based on rotation is managing this collision, either make it longer or to make it shorter. And like I said, with the high jumping, once you stick, there's very little rotation except up. The thigh's going to pitch up, you go up, you're done with this. But like in triple jump, what's happening? I'm going to get moving at the ankle, moving at the knee, moving at the hip, because these things are being extended. Even the way you come in, that we talk about, one of the things we talk about, we didn't talk about the book about up leg, down leg, but we talk about pairs. And Joe's helped me talk about this before, how vertical horizontal is actually a pair. People don't see it as a pair. They see them as they conflict one another. No, this one would be horizontal, this one would be vertical. This one would be horizontal, this one would be vertical. That's a pair working together now. And so even in running, if you look at it this way, one of the collisions is designed to be more vertical. One of the collisions is designed to be more horizontal based on which leg I'm going to be dealing at that point in time and stuff. So as we go through this, that's the hard part that people understand is that they call it absorbing force. You're not absorbing force. It's the fact that you're extending a collision. And so as the longer it takes for you to slow down, then the next joint is getting less because it was less there in the first place.
And something Adarian did tell me, which I thought was super interesting when we were talking about sprinting versus distance running, is collisions create vibration. And with sprinting, because it's such a short amount of time that you are creating the collision, you can have unwanted vibrations. That's not a good thing if you're a distance runner. That was, for me, like that made a lot of sense. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, big difference, because sprinting's so short. A couple of unwanted vibrations, no big deal. But try 26 miles of unwanted vibrations. Try 6 miles of unwanted vibrations. People wonder why, they may be feeling kind of funny at the end of a long run. Well, probably because you have some unwanted vibrations, because you have some unwanted collisions, And what's funny, you can see all this on video. All this stuff you can see on video. You can see when the torso just collides, and you go, that wasn't good there. You can see the quads. You can see how it's traveling through the body and things like that. So it's things you can see, and you go, yeah, that's not too good there. And then you can see between the really good runners, guess what? Less vibrations, unwanted vibrations. Bad runners, they have a lot of unwanted vibrations. And then you wonder why, like anything else, like we tell people, if you ride in your car, it's vibrating. But what is it? It's smooth. And smooth enough that you might go to sleep. Versus if the engine misses, it drives you nuts. Like something's wrong with this car. You can feel it. You can hear it. It's just off, and it's a dry. So think about that as a runner. These unwanted vibrations, they just make you tired. The same thing. It's just gonna make you tired and wonder why. And you get in better shape. No, get rid of the unwanted vibrations. You'll be fine.
Yeah, with the distance running, I do find it interesting too. I do think that sprinting, you can take on, I guess you could say, a less desirable technical element and still kind of compensate your way through it as best you can. And the competition changes your technique anyways. And you get through it. But if in distance running, I find it's funny because if you apply like sprint, like positional coaching to distance running, you're going to get tired real quick. And you'll just be like, screw this, I'm just going to run. And that's where it's been cool. I've done some running presentations for Jeff Nichols down in Virginia Beach, working with some special forces trainees or for future special forces trainees. And it's really been cool doing that because in the process of that, I'm like buying every book on running. Like I've had Helen Hall on the podcast, Even With Your Shoes On, amazing, like very feeling notice based system. Chi running, I'm trying to think of the other ones. Like the more you get into running, the more it really becomes like feeling noticing based, because I think, like you said, the more unwanted vibrations you take on for however many steps it is, it's like compounding itself. And so the core of that, I believe the core of it all is that noticing, but I do think it's much more important the further the thing is that you're doing, because I think the shorter it is, you can find ways to compensate around it a little bit. One thing that's interesting too, you mentioned the collisions, and I was thinking about track and field, and what's interesting in track is I noticed and I think from just a pure how the skeleton and structure of the body works and moves, I noticed with female track athletes, like the 400 meter, 800 meter, like high jump type combination is way more common in females than it is in males. And I think about sometimes, well, there's similarity there, maybe, and maybe more triple jump on a level, but maybe the contact time in high jump. But I always think, why is it more common in females than males? And maybe males can maybe compensate with a little bit more outputs. They maybe output compensate or something like that. But for females, it is maybe more the purity of the structure and how the structure and the elasticity and the collisions work. And maybe that's why that's a little bit more common with that. I don't want to make this like a super track specialist conversation.
No, it's cool.
But I was thinking, I do want to kind of try to get some more maybe take home points out of the collision element. Because I'll say, like, when I put those shoes on that you made, Adarian, like I pick up the shoe and I'm like, the shoe's got a ton of holes in it. Like, it's hilarious. I'm like, this is like half a shoe. But it is fun because I needed and that's cool because it does mitigate the friction element. You have something between your foot and the surface, the track, especially because it is like a lot that you can get traction that way faster than the grass. But you're designed to give me more pressure with something that had less surface area. It was designed to force my foot to deal with a very particular point of pressure very quickly. But outside of getting your shoes, what are some things that people like? The bricks obviously are a super simple way to deal with at least like proprioception, sensation, the surface. But I'd like you guys to share a little bit about, okay, so practical, I want to feel this in my body. I want to feel the input of pressure. I want to explore the input of pressure. Jenn, you had mentioned the pinky toe cueing. I'm always looking at too, like just inputs, environment, inputs. Tell me a little bit about what people could do listening, hey, just to feel this and to work with that sensation upwards.
Well, an easy thing to do is make sure you're training your feet on firm surfaces, which is one of the reasons the bricks work so well. And I think so often in a gym setting, it's really easy to get, I don't want to say complacent, but to use like soft surfaces. Mm-hmm. Like as Adarian and I have talked about a lot, like something like an Eric's pad or a Bosu is going to be really good at teaching your foot how to respond slowly. And yes, you'll have a lot of time to feel, but are you feeling something that's going to actually translate into performance or whatever, movement or being able to move dynamically? So that's an easy way to do it. And then playing with using different aspects of your foot. Again, one of the beauty of the bricks, Adarian has everybody slice them in half, so you can only put the ball of your foot on the brick.
Decrease the possible pressure outcomes. Yeah. You could cut it a quarter if you wanted to be crazy. I think I'll try that.
So I have a client who has like a little 2x4, and I have her do all kinds of stuff on there to kind of mimic sort of a similar sort of thing. But yeah, just different. I think different surfaces are really important.
Yeah, and even think about this here. It's funny. I've just who just came out? Puma just came out. I think it's Puma. Yeah, Puma just released one of their patents on their shoe, and they said in this patent, the carbon fiber is designed to press down the foam. And then I had to bring up my video, that I did a couple of years ago when Alpha Flies first came out. Everybody's like, "Ooh, the carbon fiber." I said, "No, the carbon fiber mashes down the foam much faster than if you didn't have the carbon fiber there. Because why? It's a harder surface, more pressure. You actually just mash the stuff down." And so sometimes shoe companies have tricked you into doing something that you don't even know you're doing as far as with pressure. But the other thing, the bricks, is one thing. And even this here, this how sensitive the body is. If you have a cement brick, and cement is not as hard as a clay brick, where a clay brick, they say, can withstand, say, 10,000. Somebody can be like, he's wrong. Let's just do numbers. Where a cement brick may be able to withstand 3,000 pounds of pressure, where a clay brick can take 10,000s. As soon as you step on one or the other, your brain knows the difference. So it'll go ahead and work harder on the clay brick than it will on the cement brick. So that's it's amazing how fast that pressure is just like, oh, this is, and that's why I tell people even about carbon fiber.
Yeah.
Why do you want carbon fiber in your shoes? Because it's hard. It's not that it's going to make you bounce. It's just hard. And we talked about before, Joe, about how the body's trying to seek the ground. So when you put the carbon fiber in, it's on the ground. It's not trying to find the ground anymore. It found it. Let's move on. So we do that. And then, like I said, even the slant board, using different slant boards and different materials, it's different than using plastic, metal, wood, and I think when Jenn first did hers, I told her she might want to get a thicker board because hers was in the middle, and the body will act accordingly because it knows like, this is kind of, and so that's part of that process is once again is using a variety of things in feeling how it works, which is why, not against Bosu, not against soft material, but soft material leaves you a pressure. It goes against what you're trying to do,
Right.
And so that becomes the other part of it is find hard stuff, find harder stuff. Even go back a long time ago, I like glass so much. One of my first insole, I went to the studio, they had the glass towel. I went to Home Depot, they had little samples, little like 1-inch samples. I made one of my first insoles out of that just because it's hard and it was glass. And so it didn't last very long, but it was like, oh, this is kind of cool. But it was hard, and I think that's what people miss out on. You need hard surfaces. And even with spike shoes, think about spikes. And this is one thing we talk about in the book too, with stress, strain, and deformation, elastic and plastic. And a lot of people don't understand those words, but elastic means it's going to return back to the previous shape. Plastic means it's permanently deformed. And so a lot of times I've shown on videos how with a spike, as you're trying to put pressure into it, it will deform. If it deforms, once again, the pressure doesn't work anymore. So you need something that's going to hold up underneath the pressure and doesn't deform and everything. So even going to that there, just understanding that there about how, like we talk about, the bone is elastic until it breaks. Now it's plastic. And so and then as part of that we talked earlier, Joe, too, this fine line. How can I push to the edge of elasticity and not break?
Yeah.
That becomes, if you go back and watch Rojas in triple jump, you think she's going to sprain her ankle. She's pushing to the edge.
Yeah, everything does.
That, she's pushing to the edge of elasticity, but she never goes to plastic. Amazing.
Yeah, that is. I do think that when you get to that high level track and field, you get a lot of people riding on the edge and managing it, versus a low level, you see just less pressure, just more general. Yeah. So I know we're running out of time. I wanted to actually run a quick anecdote by. I've been talking about, like, on the show, I've just been obsessed with running in this creek for like the last year. But part of it is because I remember the feeling of like, what did my body feel like when I was like 18 playing basketball? Super springy, barely needed to warm up at all. Just go off one leg and dunk. And it's like the easiest thing in the world. And one of the things that I returned the feeling to me is running with just minimal shoes, 5 millimeter, rubber on creek rocks, like running over little rocks in the creek. And for a lot of reasons, I like being in nature. I like the variable surfaces. I like the minimal thing. You feel the contours of the rocks. But something you guys mentioned in the book that was amazing was that the smaller the surface area, the quicker you need to get off the thing. Like if it's a big surface area and probably softer, right, you can go into it. But if it's a little surface area, and you have to get off of it, and you can't balance on it either. And that's the cool thing. If you got a string of a few rocks, you're jumping over, and some of them are small, you can't balance on that small rock. You just got to get off that thing and get to the next one. And I think that part of that reattunement of the feeling of that recollection of those elastic abilities does come from that, like that variable, like a lot of small pressure. There's some big rocks too, but a lot of them have different surfaces that aren't like smooth and, we put your foot exactly here and roll like a nice slow, even like a triple jump, you can't do it. It's like a lot of it is very quick and the surface and the rocks are hard. And so anyways, I just thought that was really cool with that element there. Maybe let's finish up because I know we don't have a lot of time, but talking about, so with, maybe we can just bring this just very, very quickly into like the gym, because like the gym and dynamic, what are the commonalities? What are the differences? If we want to link some things that, and Jenn, you mentioned bricks, like we can bring bricks in the gym and things like that. And just for people, bricks too, just take a brick, cut it in half, barefoot, stand on it. Oh, you also mentioned too, that's what I was going to say is, Jenn, you had mentioned, because I'm just thinking about simple, practical things people can do to get started. You mentioned, Jenn, just like running or walking or moving and just feeling different parts of your feet. Like in track, or it's common, just like, I mean, not common, but like, hey, be barefoot and just run on the insides of your feet, run on the outsides of your feet. And people probably don't think about why they're doing it. They're just like, I'm just working the different muscles or something, But I think that just some of that stuff is unintentionally almost just getting people to feel like that type of pressure thing. Maybe that's what I wanted to ask is, what's your thoughts on, just from a general perspective? And it's obviously ideal if you have a sensor, your environment changes. And that's what I think with the like the creek, like you could do all the plyos you want in normal shoes on a typical surface, and that's cool. But it's like, well, hey, there's a whole nother bubble outside of that offers a huge dynamic and that expands your viewpoint. So, Adarian, I'm just curious of your take on, and maybe it's like a turf or something, but just the idea of if you're going to do warm-up drills and everyone's barefoot and you're doing different like parts of the feet or something like that. Any thoughts on how to maximize that?
Well, one of the things that I always tell people is that, if you're training barefoot, remember how the foot's moving and working, because once you put the shoes on, you want the same thing. Because the shoe is just the ground now. It just has the environment changed. That's all. But I still want the same movement and stuff like that. So even on the bricks, I'll tell people where I want to work off the fifth metatarsal. If you hit on the fifth metatarsal, leg locks up. So if I want to bounce, I'm going to bounce off the fifth metatarsal. If I go to the fourth metatarsal, the knee's going to bend. If I go over here, same thing. Even like when people say press off the big toe, you can't do it. The pressure's too much. The big toe cannot handle all that pressure. And so you can stand on it, but once you try to push off of it, different ball game again, and even we've been talking this week about some things with the second toe and first toe, but that's another thing. But part of that, you want to work off different parts of your feet, even the bricks, I do a thing where I'm on the heels, or I may roll it this way, or I may say, I'm going to move the pinky toe. And I have a thing where you can isolate on the brick where I'm just going to isolate the first toe. I'm going to isolate toes 2 through 3. I'm going to isolate just this part, that becomes one thing. But once again, then you start to feel like, oh, this is what this part of the foot does. This is what this part of the foot does. This is what this part of the foot does. And then you start thinking about how fast you need to do all that just in moving.
Cool. Jenn, do you have anything to add to that? And then I'll just ask you guys about the book, and I think our time's running out. So
I will say that if you're in the gym, an easy thing you can do is play with different squat positions with your foot in a different situation, different single leg stances. And it's amazing if you load and you think about compression. So if you load the same side foot that's forward, you'll get a lot of action through that leg. And you can really play with what happens if I put pressure in this part of my foot? What happens if I spin my heel underneath me? What happens if I reach through my pinky toe? And it does translate into more dynamic movement. So it can be a really nice warm up.
Yeah. Awesome. Love it. Well, hey, this has been a really good chat, you two. Great to be on the call here. I'm glad we can make it happen. And so before we get out of here, tell me about the book. I've read it. It's been great. So I'd recommend anyone to buy it, but let me know a little bit about that before we get out of here. There's my plug for that. So
go ahead, Jenn.
We wrote a book called Let Me Introduce You, Tales of Lovers, Threesomes, and Movement. I think that's the subtitle. It's a short read, and it was a lot of fun to work on, and it's basic fundamental principles of movement. So
also too, the one thing about the book we talk about, because we talk about effort levers and things like that. There's also some life skills in the book if you want to translate even that way into some life skills about inputs, output. What you're putting in, you're gonna get out on the other side. And even like with levers and things like that, about how levers work one or two ways. Either they're gonna be strong or they're gonna be fast. And so you can't go around those two things. And so sometimes even in our life we may be thinking, I'm gonna keep doing it this way. You can't do it. You can't just do it. So that's the other part about the book too. That if you actually look at it, there are also some life skill stuff.
Yeah. As above, so below. The body is a mirror. Awesome stuff, guys. All right. Well, hey, great talking to you. Thanks so much. I'm sure we'll be doing, we did one question, so I'm sure we'll have another one in the future, maybe a bunch of them. So thanks again.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode. I'll see you next week.